everyone, we're gonna get started. If everyone wants to take a seat. Thank you all so much for coming. And if you didn't get my last announcement, we have lunch on the table by the kitchen, some water and some salad as well. So I wanna welcome everyone before we get started. First of all, my name is Helena Rim. I am a project manager at the Local Government Commission, and this workshop is part of the Sustainable Energy Incubator, which is a partnership with the Local Government Commission and Clean Power Alliance to provide CPA member agencies, board members, and other stakeholders in the LA and Ventura region with educational workshops and direct technical assistance on relevant energy and climate issues. So with that said, I wanted to, before I introduce our keynote speaker, I'll introduce the workshop focus for this quarter, which is energy and equity. So we have a great line of speakers prepared for you, starting with Aura Vasquez, who is the former LA Department of Water and Power Commissioner. So please help me welcome Aura to the stage.
I know it's gonna, this one, okay, good. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing? So I'm Aura Vasquez, and some of you know me as a commissioner for the Department of Water and Power. I became the youngest commissioner and also the first organizer, activist, environmentalist to be a commissioner for the largest publicly owned utility in the country. Before I took on being a commissioner, I had a long-standing career protecting our environment. So for me, the issue of equity and the issue of energy and water and utilities and renewables is very close to my heart, especially because those people that are most affected by climate change and by pollution and poverty and racism are the ones that sometimes don't get to reap the benefits of clean energy. So I'm excited to share with you a few things about my personal story and why I think this is important and it's in your best interest to think about as you continue working with the Clean Power Alliance and just in general, if in any of the positions that you have, to think about issues of equity and also of inclusion. So some of you might know that I'm now a candidate for Los Angeles City Council, and a lot of this was inspired by when I first moved to LA over a decade ago. And, you know, first you kind of think about LA as this place that is, you know, diverse, that is wonderful, that it has beautiful, you know, sunny weather and Hollywood, and is excellent with the beach. And for me, it was a great honor to represent the Department of Water and Power and serve as a commissioner, because for me it was a pinnacle of really bringing that diversity that makes Los Angeles better. But I think the question that I want to pose to you, and the question that I posed to the department at my tenure there, was, how do we show equity in procuring energy or in a utility? How do you do that? How do you make sure that every aspect of a utility or a entity, a place like the Clean Power Alliance, which is extremely exciting to me, it's a very dynamic idea. It feels much in my core values of democratizing energy and access. So how do you make sure that even with the ethos that you guys have, even with the ideas that you guys propose, you also don't make regular and often mistakes that other people have made in their planning and such. So one of the things that I want to mention is that at some point in my career, I was very interested in the idea of CCAs as a very new idea that started maybe 15, 20 years ago. And one of the things that you might know, or maybe you can answer this, is that in order for a city to join a CCA or to start their own CCA, What are some of the things that you guys need to present to the PUC? Who can tell me what are the first steps? Okay, you have to kind of present the cost of, of how much this is gonna entail for a city. What else? An implementation plan. Okay, we jump a little step ahead, but yes. Okay, we need to show community support. You need to do a feasibility study, right? You need to show that you can do it. You need to show that it's cost effective. You need to show that it's not going to leave people with no lights in the middle of the night one day, right? That it's gonna work. Did you know that you don't have to, in any of your planning, talk about low-income customers? Do you know that the PUC does not require that? But let me tell you that they don't. They don't. And I think it's a big mistake, simply because unless you live in a city like, I can fairly maybe say Beverly Hills, you probably live in a city like Los Angeles that is diverse in socioeconomics, in gender, in race, ethnicity, and that a lot of the people that live in this city are making $40,000 in a family of 4. So with my presentation, what I want to ignite in you is this idea that sometimes we do planning, and I have a few examples later, we do planning and we forget a huge population, which is low-income folks, and oftentimes low-income folks are like communities of color. So I was born in Colombia, and in a tiny town, in a small town outside of Cali. Cali is the 3rd biggest city in Colombia. It's in the southwest, and my town is all surrounded by sugarcane. We are a sugarcane producer, actually the 2nd largest producer in the world, my state where I was born. I first experienced equity with my dad. So my dad and my family were very involved in our community. They used to take us to fundraising events and give backs to kids that they didn't have books or couldn't attend school like we did, or they will go to town hall meetings, and we will always be taken with them. My parents will always take us with them. But my dad used to do something very special when he wasn't in his town hall meetings. He used to always shout my name across the room, Aura, Ben. He will call me up. He's like, come here. And then he will ask, what do you think about what we're doing? And, in my 6-year-old mind, I mean, you think about, a few things that you have been listening to as you're running around with your other friends. But I think that his actions really show me that my voice matters and empower me. It helped me really internalize that as a woman in a patriarchal country, my voice really mattered. And this is what equity is like. So equity is not something that you kind of write about. It's something that you often experience. So as you do your planning, or as you think about your CCA and how you participate, think about how the experience of equity, other people are experiencing equity. So in 2010, I moved to Los Angeles, and some of you I met then. And back then, I was, a young organizer. I came from a world of fighting for immigrant rights. For me, the environment was not something foreign, but was something somewhat new as a career. So I was the organizer, together with a lot of folks that some of them are here, that worked together and created a coalition to get LA to divest from coal. So you think about how LA today has the wild dream of becoming 100% renewables. We started this a decade ago, thinking about the first step is for us to get off of coal in order for us to replace dirty fossil fuel with renewable energy. So this is a long coming idea of building more for equity and for investing in people. But Los Angeles is not only movie premieres and the beach, and we have some of the most saddest issues in this country. We have one of the largest homeless and housed community in the country. We have issues of infrastructure that I'm fairly aware with at my days as commissioner. We have people that literally can't pay our bill because they just can't afford it. But what's not equitable about this is when these issues don't get addressed because of people's skin color or socioeconomics or where they live. So I think that this is worth mentioning, because the opportunity that we have here in Los Angeles is that we are a microcosm of the entire globe, the entire world. So it becomes exciting when you can think about all these issues and the ideas that you can adopt in your everyday life and in your work. So, we find solutions to global problems. We have, at least at the Department of Water and Power, being such a huge utility, we own a lot of our assets, especially on renewable energy, and a lot of our transmission lines, which makes it sometimes very easy to work with, and sometimes it hinders the work that you want to do. But we're working together with the National Renewable Energy Lab to find a way to get to 100% renewables in a way that is feasible, in a way that is cost effective, in a way that brings back local jobs, so it brings economic prosperity, and in a way that I like to also say that is equitable. And the way that we have been able to do this is by gathering a group of stakeholders of all walks of lives, from developers to environmentalists to people from other agencies in the city, to really think about how are we going to solve this problem and how we're going to get to 100% renewables and not leave anyone behind. But I like to show this map because if you see, and I'm going to do this just quickly so you can see what we headed towards. So this is the Cal Enviro screen. Maybe some of you are familiar. It's used by the state. And let me see if I can point. Oh, has a little light? Maybe, no. So if you see the blue lines, this is where the most vulnerable, most low-income communities of Los Angeles live. You can see this area here, South LA, East LA. You can see some parts of the valley. So now, let's look at what the solar potential in Los Angeles looks like. And I think I'm missing another map here, which is where there's the current solar penetration. And I like to show this map and I like to tell this story because back 10 years ago, when we started giving incentives to folks to adapt to solar and to get solar panels, we started with people that had homes. We also talked about, we also created incentives for people that obviously had a roof, that could afford having a solar panel, and also had good credit. So all of you solar companies could, provide a service. So what happened when we created that incentive? Who was missing? Low income, renters, tons of people. Half of this city lives in multifamily homes. So this is the kicker. Because we all pay to the bill, everyone that lives in Los Angeles, in a way, low-income people were subsidizing middle class and upper class people's solar. Let that sink in. Because when I understood this inequality, I was really overtaken by it. And I tell you, this was my first meeting at DWP when staff kind of were briefing me 3 years ago. And I started asking more questions and more questions and more questions, and I got to this answer. And I asked, why? And they were like, well, we just designed, this is how we designed it 10 years ago. So we created something called the Equity Matrix Data Initiative at DWP. And the Equity Matrix is a tool that we use our utility that also looks into gender, race, socioeconomics, zip code, so that there's no Angelino that stays behind when we develop a program or an incentive or have even materials bring out or decide to table at events. So we decided to do this and give people the power to have a tool to come back to us and say, you are my utility. LADWP is the largest public-owned utility. You are my utility, and I deserve the same as others. So for us, it was important to give back something that people could utilize and return to our utility and make us accountable. I know that this sounds strange because historically, DWP hasn't really had this mantra or even this attitude. But for us, it was really important to make sure that we repair the decades of some people getting more than others. So we created a few things that are exciting. So this is Linda Jones, and she lives in South LA. She lives near that blue area in the map where there's the most solar penetration, but there's the most solar potential, but the least solar penetration. And what we did with Linda, the program that we created for Linda was that she could adopt to our program. So we rent her roof, and we paid her a year about $360, $400. We provide the solar panels. She doesn't need to have good credit. She doesn't need to have a down payment for the solar panels. She doesn't need to deal with anything. All she does is to let us use her rooftop, and she reaps the benefits from having, wait, hold on, there you go. This is when the stolen solar, there you go. From having solar. So without the equity metrics, without looking comprehensively at our programs, people like Linda that maybe don't have good credit or maybe don't have the down payment wouldn't have the opportunity to join the renewable energy revolution because she just couldn't afford it or she just couldn't have it. In terms of EV infrastructure, we installed 22 EV charging stations in Crenshaw. Crenshaw is in the southern part of Los Angeles and is one of the most polluted areas of Los Angeles. And it's also one of the places where there is the least EV penetration, so people don't really own EVs. So we decided, well, maybe if we have these charging stations in this place, maybe people will be more incentivized to buy EV cars. And then I said, no, this is not how it really works. We have to incentivize people directly to buy an EV car. So we created with the California Aerosols Board a program where if you are of a certain income, you can ask for a rebate from us and buy a used car. Because a lot of low-income folks cannot afford even a new car. So this is like the realities, and I know for a lot of us, this is not our reality. And because we don't live it, and because we don't know it, we think this doesn't happen. But it's happening out there. So this is, I think the question that I wanted to answer with this presentation was, what are the dangers of not looking at equity? And those are the dangers, that you leave a community that has been historically oppressed and not accounted for, even more oppressed and more unaccounted for with the policies that you create. So I don't think I have a picture here about, I'm gonna come back to the solar, but we also created a program of solar for renters. And I think some people here were included in that celebration. And for me, was really the pinnacle of 10 years of work. Because I remember sitting in a coffee shop with a friend and telling him, you know, we're gonna get off of coal, but the real problem is that renters don't have solar. People like me that rent a home, that we don't own a home, we don't have our own rooftop. So at DWP, we created a solar for renters that is actually launching right now, that is designed for multifamily homes, for people that don't own, you know, that they don't own a home or they live in a multifamily building. But as the department has to answer really complex questions, and you all have to answer really complex questions, and as I continue my crusade to make this city better, and I have to answer some very complex questions, I wanna share a little story with you, which is, the first time when I came across environmental issues or just anything related to activism, I was about 11 years old and I was in school. And on Saturday morning, I saw a show about the ozone layer. And this is in the late 80s. So they talked about seawater rise level, and they talked about a lot of other different issues that were gonna cause, because the ozone layer had a hole and it was causing the earth to warm up. So I went on Monday to my school, and I asked to talk to my principal. And, you know, I asked her, I said, what are you doing to mitigate the effects? What are you doing about the ozone layer and global warming? And she said to me, well, what are you gonna do about it? And I think that I like to take this really kind of sweet story with people, because I think that it's up to us to answer that question. And I wanna post it to you and say, what are you gonna do about it? And, you know, in my 11-year-old mind, I remember, like, in the show, they talked about the aerosols. Do you guys remember in the 80s with the hair, the wild stuff? And in the show, they talked about that the aerosols were really causing the issue of the ozone layer. So I told my principal, I said, well, you know, if we ban aerosols in my school, and if we ban aerosols in my town, well, maybe we can stop global warming. And she said, okay, let's do it. So that's what we went and did. I recruited a bunch of friends, and we went classroom to classroom, and we were able to ban aerosols back in the 80s. So just like I took that action, I want to leave you with this question, which is, what are you going to do about it? And what are you going to do about bringing more equity? Not just to this entity, but to your life, and to your heart, and how you see the world, and how you're planning to change the world in your career. So I think I'm done for now. So thank you so much for listening. And I don't know if we have a minute for questions or such right now. At the end, okay. Well, thank you so much for listening.
All right, thank you so much, Arda. Our next speaker is Heather Allen, and she's going to be speaking on the design process for equitable energy programs. So please help me welcome Heather.
Hi, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay? Wow, big photo. So I'm here to talk about shaping energy programs through equitable community engagement. We take a really simple approach in Ventura County. We look for grants that seem like it'd be a good program, stuff that our cities are interested in. VCREA has really small staff. It's 5 full-time employees, work staff for the County of Ventura, and we also support 13 member agencies. So we do a lot. And for these programs, we need help. I am great with analyzing data and writing plans, but community outreach isn't my strength. So when we see funding opportunities, we gather a project team. We work a lot with Community Environmental Council because they're great with organizing advocates and working with community-based organizations. We work with a lot of Civic Spark fellows because they are always energetic and help bring new outreach ideas and program ideas. We work with our cities that are enthusiastic about certain projects. And so today I'm going to talk about 2 programs that I manage. One is developing energy action plans for the cities of Moorpark, Ventura, and Thousand Oaks. And then I'm also going to talk about our electric vehicle blueprint, and that's creating a regional plan for the county, as well as accelerator plans for the cities of Oxnard and Ventura. They have some state-designated disadvantaged communities, and also an accelerator plan for the Port of Waimea. So we also try to gather different funding sources. So this is an example of who's our partners and our funding for our energy action plan development. One of the things I like with community outreach is if people are coming to our events, you want to feed them because they're spending their time out of their busy schedule to come to you, learn about what you're working on. So most of our grants are from the Energy Commission, but we also look at our utility partners or city partners to help fund providing food because the Energy Commission doesn't provide food at community events. So we put together a bunch of different funding, a bunch of different project partners. This is who works on our electric vehicle blueprint. We have a lot of match funds from all of our staff, which greatly increases the project budget. So like I said, we take a really simple approach for our outreach goals. We want to reach all of our community members. So we hold events throughout all of the project area. Make sure that we have a couple events, big and small, in every little section of our project area, our county, our cities. We want to reach all age levels and all community groups. We take a multi-tiered engagement process. Like I said, we have big events, small events, pop-up events. We have our own standalone events. We tack on to other community events. We do two-way engagement because why sit there and just tell people information? We want to hear what the unmet needs are and the gaps in our community. So we do a lot of listening and asking questions. All of our outreach materials are in English and Spanish. We provide paper and electronic materials because not everyone has access to computers. And we make sure that everything we do is easily replicable. We can share it with the rest of our cities and our surrounding counties, and also share our lessons learned whenever we can. So like I said, whenever we have events, we bring paper copies, we bring a tablet, we send out electronic information, and it's all in English and Spanish. We table at events that are not just our Earth Day festivals. We also go to job fairs, health and wellness fairs, even 4th of July street fairs, not the typical environmental events. We have pop-up events at farmers markets, at restaurants, at coffee shops, wherever people are gathering. We do the typical dedicated workshops and meetings, and of course digital outreach. But like I said, we provide food and children's activities at all of our events. If you're talking to children about energy efficiency and climate issues, then their parents are usually listening, or they go home and share what they learned with their parents. And we give prize giveaways. It's amazing how many people took our survey just to get a metal straw. Hundreds of people wanted metal straws. We also give away, for filling out the survey or attending events, we have raffle prizes where we'll give away really cool water bottles, our battery banks, our solar reading lights, our even compost bins. So right now I'm going to focus on our round 1 survey for our City of Ventura Energy Action Plan or outreach. We basically just wanted to see what the community was interested in. So we hit all age ranges. We went to schools, school club meetings, senior citizen centers, housing authority meetings, resident or neighborhood community meetings. And we got students, businesses, business owners and renters, also residential renters and homeowners to take part in our survey. So we learned that 88% of our respondents want the City of Ventura to focus on a clean energy economy, public health, and resilience. And when we're developing these planning documents, the point of these surveys is to collect data. So when we develop these policies or strategies or measures, and decision makers ask us, why do you think this is a good strategy? We have data from our surveys that says, your residents want you to focus on public health and resilience. We learned a lot of students really want renewable energy in their schools. 75% of our respondents want the city to be proactive in thinking and planning for climate change impacts. We already know that homeowners are doing the low-hanging fruit, but now we have data that backs that. So homeowners are already installing LEDs, low-flow shower heads, but they're not doing attic insulation, wall insulation, HVAC tune-ups, or not sealing their air ducts. So we have this data now, which helps figure out where the gaps are and what strategies we can develop in a cost-effective way to make homeowners make these improvements. We also asked homeowners and renters, why haven't you made these upgrades? It costs too much. They don't have time. Are there renters? So we need a bunch of strategies for renters. So commercial survey highlights, 40% of our businesses rent, and they don't know if they can even make energy efficiency upgrades. So we need to do outreach to business owners and the landowners. We asked business owners that made the upgrades, why did they? To save money, to save energy, concern for the environment. And surprisingly, a nice percentage actually it's part of their business strategy. So we collected all this data, and now we're going back to the community. We're doing a round 2 survey where we have these draft strategies, and we're asking the community members and the business owners if they like us focusing a strategy for developing financing for a certain sector, like senior or disabled residents, or for multifamily homes or renters. Do you want just behavioral strategies where we provide information to the landlords and to the tenants, or do you want us to actually require when rental units are vacant that the owners install LEDs? So we get this feedback, so when we present these strategies, we know we have the support of the community and we can present this to decision makers and they have all the information they need. So I'm going to switch now to our electric vehicle outreach. We're still conducting all of our outreach and analyzing our surveys and outreach efforts, but some things we have learned along the way is in-person outreach works best, especially for electric vehicles. This is a new technology to a lot of our community members, and they think it's only Teslas, people driving electric Teslas for like $150,000 cars, but there's a lot cheaper options out there for electric vehicles. So we focus our outreach on multifamily housing, low income, and workplaces. So we learned that a lot of our property managers aren't interested in EV charging. Their residents aren't really asking about it. However, if they do have residents that install chargers, they're usually doing it in their assigned parking. And when you have 2 or 3 level 1 or level 2 chargers, then it's overloading the electrical load. And so that becomes a problem. We learned working with cause, a lot of our lower income residents aren't really even thinking about electric vehicles. They want reliable, convenient ride shares. And if those ride shares are electric, that's awesome. They want last mile solutions. A big portion of our county doesn't have reliable bus service, let alone any place to charge an electric vehicle. From our workplace surveys, we're learning that about 60% of the respondents think they're gonna purchase an electric vehicle in the next 2 years. So we need to plan for this infrastructure. There's still tons of concerns in our county about reliability, where charging stations are, charging rates are too expensive, what's gonna happen with the battery when it dies, can I resell my car, how much does a replacement cost? So more to come on this, we're just beginning the outreach. And so also, a lot of times when we're presenting our energy programs to our decision makers in our county, we focus on how we're improving health and air quality and lowering cost, focus on those two areas. And then we talk about, oh, we're reducing emissions, helping the environment. But we like to focus a lot on lowering cost and improving air quality. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Before we move on to our next speaker, I just wanted to make a quick announcement that I missed at the beginning of the workshop. So this workshop is being recorded and it'll be available on the Clean Power Alliance website in the next week or so. It's also being live streamed at a remote location in Ventura County for folks who are not able to attend in person today. But thank you all for being able to attend in person. I also wanted to give a shout out to the Civic Spark Fellows, as mentioned by Heather. We have a few of them in the workshop today who are going to be helping facilitate the breakout discussions when we get to that portion of the workshop agenda. I also wanted to thank the CPA board and directors for attending this workshop, so thank you guys for attending. Okay, so our next speaker is Ami Raval, and she will be speaking to the structure of equitable energy programs. And she's from the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. So please help me welcome Ami.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here from the Bay, where I flew in from this morning. As mentioned, I work at the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. APEN is an environmental justice organization. We're a community-based organization. We organize in Oakland and in Richmond. Local organizing is the heart of our work around air quality, climate mitigation, adaptation, housing, which is major issue in the Bay and across the state, and clean energy, which is what I'm going to focus on today. In addition to local organizing, we do statewide policy advocacy. And so APEN is just one of a large group of organizations as part of the California Environmental Justice Alliance, or CEJA. Are any of you familiar with CEJA? Okay, some of you. So that's a statewide environmental justice alliance, and really the main vehicle through which we do policy advocacy for environmental justice. And so I'm going to be focusing on structure today. I know a lot of folks in the room are working locally and regionally. The examples that I'm going to provide around some of the programs we have advocated are at the state level, but I think there's a lot of elements to learn from and model that we've kind of won at the state level, locally and regionally. So just as a brief kind of framing, how many folks are familiar with the term environmental justice? I hope everyone. Amazing. So at APEN, you know, our principle around environmental justice really asserts that all people have a right to a clean and healthy environment in which their communities can live, work, learn, play, and thrive. And so, you know, with roots in the civil rights movement, environmental justice is really born out of the struggle against you know, dirty industrial facilities and waste sites being overrepresented in low-income communities of color. And so it's really thinking about the distribution of environmental harms. And so a key principle of organizing is that the most impacted communities really speak for themselves and lead with the solutions. And so that aligns with our analysis about really challenging structures of power, and all the solutions that I'm going to be sharing today really like lead with that principle of our communities have the solutions and should really be at the table and asserting that vision. And so when developing equitable energy solutions, we have to keep in mind that environmental justice communities have unique energy-related vulnerabilities. So we know that low-income households pay a much larger part of their incomes on utility bills. And we know that energy insecurity leads to a whole host of health issues like increasing the incidence of asthma, respiratory problems, heart disease due to insufficient access to heating and cooling. We also know that low-income communities of color are more vulnerable to utility disconnections, which can leave the lights out when electricity needs are crucial, especially thinking about dangerously hot or cold days, and thinking about folks that rely on medical equipment or have larger families with many children. And then there's specific characteristics that we think about when it comes to low-income Californians. How many folks are familiar with the SB 350 barriers study from the Energy Commission? Okay, I would really recommend taking a look at that. That was kind of a landmark report published by the Energy Commission that outlines the barriers and opportunities for clean energy and energy efficiency, specifically for low-income communities and disadvantaged communities. And it includes a lot of the issues that folks have talked about today, right? That low-income Californians, the vast majority of them, 70%, are renters. Half of them live in multifamily affordable housing. And many also use a primary language other than English. And so it kind of outlines the characteristics and the things we need to be thinking about when designing programs for low-income communities and disadvantaged communities. It talks about lack of capital for, signing up for programs, lack of credit. Again, things that we've talked about, but articulates that in a detailed report, and then articulates a roadmap for the types of solutions we need to see to overcome those issues. And so we talk a lot about the green divide, which is that despite the disproportionate impacts our communities bear, we haven't seen the kind of major innovations and investment in clean energy that our communities really want to see. And so in the green, there's a poster that one of our Ceja youth has that communities of color are the most polluted. So why don't we have the most solar panels and renewable energy installations? And there's lots of data, obviously, to back this up. We've worked with researchers that show that the communities living in close proximity to dirty facilities have a higher proportion of people of color, have a higher proportion of low-income folks. And as the number of facilities increase, the higher the proportion people of color. So in terms of our vision for energy equity, there's a kind of a host of elements that we want to see, but part of that, at the center is local distributed generation. We really want to see investments in our communities, whether that's energy efficiency, solar coupled with storage, microgrids, et cetera, because with that local investment comes local benefits like economic development, like local air quality benefits. All of this is rooted around strong partnerships. And so it's not APEN alone that can do this work, but as I mentioned, we're part of a network of organizations across the state that are advancing similar solutions. We also, there's, just a couple like educational opportunities, just as discussed. We want to empower our community members with the knowledge about the clean energy economy and to be really excited about it. So when you're designing programs, really thinking about how you can engage communities to know how their system is benefiting them is really, really important as part of, a model of empowerment. And at the bottom, we talk about local control and wealth building. Opportunities for community ownership, although are harder to design, really exciting because that accrues wealth in the communities that we're working in that have been historically disinvested from. And then climate resilience, which I'm going to talk more about because this is something that's really on the forefront of our minds, and I think specifically in California. So in terms of, I'm going to share some broad program structure elements, and then I'll go into a couple examples. So in terms of program eligibility, some of the kind of key communities we think about, number one is disadvantaged communities. This is really a place-based definition of targeting environmental justice communities, the places that have been most impacted by poverty and pollution. And I want to just name that it uses CalEnviroscreen, which is a environmental health screening tool to kind of compile indicators to define, right, where the hotspots of poverty and pollution, but that you can adapt CalEnviroscreen and disadvantaged communities as a definition locally or regionally, right? So you have to think about how you can use the tool to be catered to the needs of your locality. There's also obviously low-income communities, which is a little bit more straightforward in terms of income threshold. So that could be defined as area median income or by state median income, depending on kind of the scale that you're working at, or just those that are eligible for discount programs through the utilities like CARE or FARA. And I believe those are equate to 200% of the federal poverty level. And then there's this other kind of definition of communities that we think about as vulnerable or frontline communities. So as we're thinking about clean energy investments, if we're also trying to promote climate adaptation resilience, thinking about where is wildfire risk most severe, where are we going to see more extreme heat days, right? And really targeting solutions to think about those climate change threats kind of geographically, as well as communities' ability to kind of cope and respond is also, I think, something that at least in the environmental justice movement, we're continuing to target, especially in this moment. When thinking about geography, again, as a statewide organization, but we can think about this regionally, we really want to make sure we're reaching the geographic diversity within a region or across the state. And so that really kind of means evaluating programs that are first come, first serve, because you're not necessarily going to reach that diversity when you're just kind of allowing whoever signs up first to take advantage of a program. And so establishing targets that make sure there's an equitable distribution of funding, whether that's between disadvantaged communities or low-income communities, or across different housing sectors, depending on the program, or also projects across urban, suburban, and rural communities. And then some other factors that to consider, like I said, APEN works with immigrant and refugee communities, specifically Asian American immigrant and refugee communities. So we're thinking about demographic characteristics like race and ethnicity, linguistic isolation, whether folks are foreign-born, educational attainment, energy insecurity, and cost burden, as well as housing affordability and whether they're renters, et cetera. And as I mentioned, we know that our communities have a distinct vulnerability to power outages and surges, and especially are threatened by rising costs of utility bills and the economic impacts of climate change. So some of the, as I mentioned, technologies we're really excited about are energy efficiency, because we know that higher performance buildings can maintain temperatures and allow folks to shelter in place longer if there is, an extreme heat day or they need to kind of, take refuge. And so we're thinking about folks like the elderly and disabled and those with medical conditions as uniquely vulnerable and important to target in that regard. We're also thinking, like I said, solar coupled with storage and microgrids. And when designing those, what we're really kind of excited about is seeing those investments in community institutions like food banks, emergency shelters, and evacuation shelters, places where that those types of community centers and places where people go when there is a disaster, having solar and storage and having electricity to provide the community can have massive health and resilience benefits. And so there's some targeting, right, when it comes to these emerging technologies that promote resilience. So with that, I'm going to end with a couple really discrete examples from the state. The first is the Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing Program, or SOMA. SOMA will invest $1 billion for solar and multifamily affordable housing over the next 10 years. It's the largest investment in solar on affordable housing in the country. And it will result in 300 megawatts of new solar projects, hopefully serving over 150,000 low-income renters living in affordable housing. So there's just a lot of great elements in terms of structure to model here. So right now, in terms of who's eligible, it's housing with 5 or more units that are deed restricted. And in terms of that piece on eligibility, it's either housing, affordable housing that's income qualified, so 80% of the households are at or below 60% of the area median income, or are located in a disadvantaged community. So it kind of does both income qualified or that place-based targeting environmental justice communities. The bill that created this program was co-sponsored by the California Environmental Justice Alliance. So a lot of the values are really aligned with the EJ principles that I talked about. There's a piece on affordability. So it's restricted, right, to deed restricted housing, which means that for the housing that do take advantage of SOMA, tenants don't have to be afraid that their rents are going to go up because of the investment. And I think that's something to be really mindful about. We don't want to see unintended consequences when energy upgrade happens, the building gets solar, and then, the tenant gets displaced because the property owner can increase in rent. And so there's that restriction. There's a piece, just getting down to savings, that tenants receive a direct economic benefit. And so 51% of the system savings must go to the tenant, and then the other 49 go to the property owner, which means there was one way to address the issue of split incentive. There's an element of marketing, education, and outreach. So APEN actually is a subcontractor in the Bay to do tenant organizing and get folks really excited about the program, to learn what is SOMA, how can they benefit, and how can they encourage their property owners to sign up and participate in the program. And that does it's both getting the word out about the program, but again, empowering tenants, even though they're not the decision maker, to learn about solar and get excited about the opportunity, both to benefit and to see investment in their communities. And in LA, you may be familiar with an environmental organization called Communities for a Better Environment. They'll be doing, similarly as a subcontractor, that local outreach. And then workforce development. So embedded in the program are training opportunities as well as local and targeted hiring initiatives. Okay, so the next program, so we worked on a bill called AB 523, which was passed in 2017. It was focused on equity and clean energy funds. So it focused on basically creating a carve out for disadvantaged communities and low income households for a program called the Electric Program Investment Charge, or EPIC, which is basically funding for energy innovation. And so specifically these exciting technology demonstration and deployment funding, that there's kind of a set target for the communities that we work with. And we were really excited when this passed. We were involved in the passage, but we applied for a grant through EPIC. And it was really, really difficult. And we didn't actually end up getting the funding it was specifically for a microgrid in Oakland, Chinatown, at a school and a community center. And I think we learned a lot about how difficult it is to actually apply to state funding, especially as a community-based organization. And so I wanted to offer this as an example because as you all think about designing funding applications and solicitations, right, that applicants can propose different clean energy projects, there's some like really key things, straightforward from my perspective, that you have to think about if you want community-based organizations to really be able to engage and access funding. So one of the things we offered some recommendations after we didn't get the funding, that one, there should be something embedded in application processes about applicants showing that the proposed project addresses an important community identified need. So can they demonstrate they did outreach in the community or partnered with an organization to really prove that the project they're proposing is connected to what folks in the community want? But even once that happens, right, for a group like APEN to engage, everyone's so stuck in their silos, but we need to work with technical partners, right? We need to work with folks that know how to deploy solar and storage and have the expertise that we don't have. We have the community expertise, but not the technical expertise. It was really hard for us to connect across partners. So we offered that there should be some sort of inventory of eligible project partners that are interested, and really facilitating in-person meetings so that we can meet folks outside of our sector to think about what a successful team could look like. We recommended extended notice in advance of solicitations because we had 3 months to put together, like a 150-page application, and we were definitely working against the clock. We asked for a website that's user-friendly and accessible so that there can be more materials housed in one place instead of kind of navigating what we found to be a really complicated kind of online set of documents. And then finally, offering technical assistance. We could have really benefited from an in-house resource specialist at the PUC or the CEC to be able to answer questions about some of the requirements of the application. And so to have either capacity building workshops or, even just following up with us after we didn't get the grant to help us learn how to engage better. I think these are just examples of ways you're really meaningfully going to be able to have community-based organizations participate in grant funding that you design, whether that's at the city or the county level. And to close, the last one that I'm really excited about is the Community Solar Green Tariff Program. So community solar is really exciting for renters, for folks that live in older homes that can't put solar on their rooftop. And this program is really addressing the folks that aren't addressed by SOMA, right? That don't live in multifamily affordable housing, but are renting and want to be a part of the clean energy economy. So this was a program we just got approved through a proceeding at the PUC. And what this is going to encourage, it's currently through the utilities, are community-based solar projects. And so these projects, the way this program's designed, they must be sited in disadvantaged communities, the top 25%, according to Enviroscreen. And the subscribers have to be located within 5 miles of the project. And we're really excited about that because that means the folks that are participating also kind of live in close proximity. So it gets that community-based value of ours about investment in community. In terms of who's eligible, priority is given to low-income residents living in disadvantaged communities, but it's also non-care customers are also eligible. There's just a prioritization kind of structure. I think one of the most transformative elements and the way it will really make community solar accessible to the folks we work with is that the program guarantees a 20% discount off of the total overall bill for a participating subscriber. That alone, I think, is going to address a lot of the barriers and challenges with community solar, which is that folks don't have upfront capital to invest in to sign up for a community solar program. And in fact, they need to see a savings to really incentivize them to participate. So that is coming through public funding. There is an opportunity for local ownership if feasible, but the developer kind of has to figure that out alongside the project team. There's funding for outreach and recruitment, and we're hoping that community-based organizations can really be involved when projects are proposed to do that outreach and to recruit subscribers. There's this innovative element of sponsorship, which means that either local government or CBO has to offer a letter of support and really be the sponsoring anchors to show that community interest and support. And then finally, similar to some of the other models I shared, there's a workforce element around local and targeted hiring requirements. So I know that was fast and it was a lot, but those are just some of the models. You can learn all about them. And if you have any questions about kind of these specifics, I'm happy to answer, but that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ami. Okay. Is everyone doing okay? You're awake? Okay, good. All right, so we're a little bit behind on our agenda, so we're gonna cut down our breakout discussion time to about 15 to 20 minutes. So right now, if you guys could gather around the tables down here and get into groups of 6 to 8 based on where you're sitting. There's a worksheet in front of you at each table where we'll have the Civic Spark Fellows, or if you don't have a Civic Spark Fellow, you can volunteer someone to be the discussion lead, and you can answer the questions on what type of energy-related inequities are out there that you just heard of or you know of from your own experience, and then what are the creative solutions to be able to overcome these inequities and these challenges that you guys face as implementers or as planners. So if you guys could go into groups, we'll do that for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we have 2 more great speakers lined up for you guys. So yeah, thank you. And we will have a Q&A after that with all of the speakers as well. So this next presentation is actually happening remotely. We have Deidre Sanders from East Bay Community Energy, who's going to be talking about her, or East Bay Community Energy's research on redefining disadvantaged communities.
For CCAs, there's been this narrative out there for a bit that says that, particularly among decision makers, legislators, regulators, and others, that CCAs serve primarily affluent, mostly coastal communities, and that IOUs are left to serve the more low-income customers that remain in the system, and that IOUs are pretty much cherry-picked, more affluent communities. So we've seen this where PG&E has stated that it serves 23% of care customers and CCAs only 17%. This was in a filing that they made that MCE and San Francisco were early entrants to CCAs. That PCE and Silicon Valley serve more affluent communities. And this is also partly, perception, because these communities are closer to San Francisco and the Bay Area where the PUC is housed. Also, we've seen that tools to identify disadvantaged communities have also supported this narrative. And Callan Virus Screen, the one that is the most well-known and widely used tool used to identify disadvantaged communities. But the question is this narrative accurate? And our position is it is not. Next slide. So the narrative is framed mostly by the data. And data used to identify low-income communities and households is not complete. It's based on income, and in the view of many of us, it ignores the relative cost of living in given communities, which would include housing and transportation and food in addition to utilities. So most of us are familiar with the CARE program. let's start there. And first of all, the IOUs often report in and are required to report in to the PUC on the level of care enrollment in their service territories. And for most of them, I think they report that they have care enrollment. They estimate that they have 90% penetration or 90% enrollment of eligible care customers across their systems are enrolled in care. But we should also keep in mind that care is a self enrollment program. So those who self-identify and present themselves and apply are those who enroll. It's not one where someone else would identify and ignore and enroll them. They have to so when you identify and put yourself forward and enroll, then you can become a care a customer on the care program. If you don't, then of course you're not. County Environment Screen is not designed to identify disadvantaged communities, and it is an allocation tool. I'm going to ask if there's some background noise, and I don't know if that's from the room or there's somebody else.
Deidre, can you hear us?
Previous slide, please.
Okay.
Thank you. So Cal Environment Screen identifies actually a subset of disadvantaged communities. These are disadvantaged communities that have an environmental impact. So when you identify the subset and in place of the set, then you leave out communities in the larger set that might otherwise be identified as disadvantaged. So it doesn't always, one of the other shortcomings of the tool is it doesn't always differentiate between incorporated and unincorporated communities, and also unincorporated and suburban communities that it does have data for, have pockets of poverty that may be lost and diffused because it is surrounded by relative affluence. So when we look at, say, another data point, census tract poverty level is based on the federal poverty level. So usually, like for care, households having 200% above the poverty level, anything up to 200% is included in the care eligibility. So in a family of four, that could be a bit more actually now than about $50,000 a year. But when you look at the median household incomes in California, including LA County and whatnot, you see that median household income is above often what the federal poverty level is. And so these households would not qualify, even though the median rent could be very high. So what they're actually living on, the net income after paying for living expenses could actually have these households living in serious poverty. Next slide. So here are some data sources that I would suggest that many of you look to identify, get a good sense of the demography of your service areas. So U.S. Census Quick Facts is a great source, as well as American Fact Finder, and the California Department of Finance keeps a lot of this data. in CalEnviroScreen, if you want to identify poverty, I would recommend that you not look at the overall CalEnviroScreen score. There is a separate poverty score, and I would suggest that you look to the poverty score for understanding where the real socioeconomic disadvantage is, without looking at the overall score, which is going to give you that environmental layer, which will change the rankings and the score. So final source is what I call what's known as the California Poverty Measure. I think that's pretty much on the mark, because it also includes in its assessment of poverty cost of living, housing cost, and also mitigating factors such as if a household is already receiving some social benefits that supplement their income. This could actually change how this household lives and the degree of poverty that they actually experience. So these are just data points that I include to show how the poverty measure can actually move the percentage of people living in poverty based on these other factors and indicators. So look at Los Angeles County. U.S. Census has it in 2017 at 15%, but the California Poverty Measure had it at 24%. So that's almost a 10-point increase based on just these other cost of living factors, less than mitigation. Next slide, please. This is some data from our own service area. We serve Alameda County, East Bay Community Energy, where I work. And these are the cities within Alameda County. The italicized communities are unincorporated areas. And note towards the bottom, you'll see the yellow highlighted areas. These are areas of particularly high poverty. So, and with care enrollment. So the care enrollment for Berkeley, Oakland, our two incorporated cities is about 20%. And then we have the unincorporated communities of Cherryland and Ashland. And you can see that they have actually particularly high care enrollment, but also take a look at the incomes for those communities. They're rather low, and we've had Department of Social Services shared with me about a week ago that in Alameda County, for a family of 3 to live comfortably, this is just to have their basic needs met, pay the rent, and see to all their needs, is going to require right now about $99,000 a year per household, family of 3 in Alameda County. So you can see we have numerous communities where the residents earn considerably less than what's required to live comfortably in Alameda County. Next slide. So just another summary slide that shows you that according to the California Poverty Measure, what the real level of poverty is by county in California. So you can see the bottom left, Los Angeles County is about 24%, and the bottom far right, the next one up, Ventura is 18%. And these are higher than what the census data shows us for poverty for both of these counties. Next slide. This is one exercise we did in Alameda County where we wanted to look at the California environmental screening tool, and we wanted to look at it for poverty. And this is what I said earlier, just look at the poverty data. So we actually geocoded it and mapped it to see where the poverty levels were, that if poverty by census tract would score in the top 25%, what would be those communities just for poverty? Next slide. Then we took separately and just looked at the cumulative top 25% of California environmental, the top 25 census tract for Cal Enviro Screen. This is just the official, these are the official census tracts that are prioritized by the state for energy investment. This is where all of our EVs are supposed to be prioritized, where our community solar should be prioritized, everything like that. And we looked at to see where those communities are. And the next slide. Then we overlaid the two, the sort of matchup we had. And as you can see, we have some significant departures, some divergence, where we have a number of socioeconomically disadvantaged communities that are not in the top 25% of Cal Enviro Screen, but are in the top 25% of poverty. And we also have a few that are in the top 25% of Cal Enviro Screen that are not in the top 25% for poverty. And these are significant areas of departures. A lot of these, like the big yellow area on the left, are mainly industrial areas and near the bay, and don't have large populations. The two groups that are circled, that I point out by circling them in red, the top one is Ashland and the bottom is Cherryland. If you recall, they had very high levels of care enrollment and very low income levels. And they are, while they are near Cal Enviro Screen areas, they are not in them. And that is only because their relative environmental impacts are low. So, point made that Cal Enviro Screen does not identify disadvantaged communities. I'm talking about socioeconomic disadvantage. It only identifies communities that have comparatively high socioeconomic disadvantage overlaid with high environmental impacts. So if you're looking for it to identify your disadvantaged communities, be careful, because you're likely to miss a significant number of them. Next slide. This is just a quick study I did of census tract data of Clean Power Alliance incorporated areas. You can see in red those that have significantly low income communities or low income households, median household income. I just want to remind folks that a median just means that about half of the people are making more than this amount and half make less. So while this is median income at Hawaiian Gardens at $36,000 a year in 2016, 2017, that means they've got a population of people that also make less than that. And look at the poverty percentage at 30%. So that's quite significant. All right, bye. I also found it ranking that the Clean Power Alliance areas, unincorporated areas, had a lot more disadvantage concentrated in the unincorporated areas than in incorporated areas. So look at the bottom of the screen at Westmont and Willowbrook and how low those incomes are. Also, in the middle of the screen, Little Rock, Pear Blossom. And then around it, you have these pockets of affluence. So Stevenson Ranch, Topanga Canyon, Marina Del Rey. Marina Del Rey is an interesting community because while the median household income in Marina Del Rey is about $100,000, because of the high percentage of renters in the community, you can see that the owner-occupied units in Marina Del Rey is only about 5%, which is very unusual. Okay, next slide. So back to the Cal Enviro Screen. This slide is just to illustrate that there is not, we don't always understand why a community is ranked in the top 25% of Callan virus screen. It could be for many reasons. So a community could be there for pesticide use or poor drinking water quality, or because there's a hazardous waste facility nearby, or they might be near an airport or have traffic problems because they're near a major freeway intersection. And that combined with socioeconomic indicators influence the score. So in this community, you see that the actual census tract is actually rather green. And it's green because it only ranks in the 35th to 40th percentile. But also note the pollution burden for this community. Pollution burden for this community is in the 91st percentile. So you're wondering why it's green. Look below that for the population characteristics. Population characteristics, it only ranks in the 16th percentile. So according to Callan virus screen, this is not a community of concern in terms of environmental impact, despite ranking in the 91st percentile for pollution burden. Next slide. Okay, a tale of two census tracts. This census tract in Willowbrook, which is in the CPA service area, is scoring in the top 5% of Callan virus screen. It actually has a slightly lower pollution burden than the previous census tract we looked at that was actually a little bit green at 85, where it was 91. But where the other community had population characteristics in the 16th percentile, this one is in the 99th percentile. So this is the reason why it's in the top 5% of Callan virus screen. Much more socioeconomic indicators than actual pollution burden, which is significant. But just pointing that out because as you get further down into Callan virus screen, you will find communities that maybe rank in the 76th percentile for pollution burden and maybe in the 41st percentile for population characteristics, sort of middling both ways, but only be in, let's say, the 45th percentile for Callan virus screen. So they have significant pollution. They have some communities of concern or pockets of concern, but cannot score high enough in Callan virus screen to rank as a community of concern. And again, we don't know why these communities are scoring so high. Next slide, please. So this is what I call a poverty pocket. And I look at this section of Rosemead Boulevard in the San Gabriel Valley between the 210 freeway and I think it's Longren Avenue. I point this out only because I lived in Pasadena for many years and know this area quite well. And this strip of Rosemead Boulevard for about a block on either side is unincorporated county. But you can't see this from Callan virus screen. It looks all green, it looks all good. And that is because the unincorporated areas are not delineated in Callan virus screen. So the previous slide, Willowbrook, not delineated as a county area and unincorporated, not delineated as CPA service territory as unincorporated county. And that's the same for this section of Rosemead Boulevard, which is unincorporated. It also has a lot of low-income apartment on the street. And so what that means is that these poverty pockets lost among the relative affluence on either side. On the east side of Rosemead Boulevard, you have Arcadia. And on the west side of Rosemead Boulevard, we have unincorporated East Pasadena. And right next to that, San Marino, two relatively affluent areas. So anyway, just want to point out that some of these communities are lost, unincorporated areas are lost among affluence. The census tract on the right, again, just to illustrate that significant pollution burden at 81, but because of the population characteristic at 37, it is only in the 55th to 60th percentile for Callan virus screen and is not deemed relatively a community of concern. And it's in a relatively more affluent area, so relatively, I'll say that. So it is not going to be a community of focus for investment for CCAs or for the IOUs. Next slide. So we finally get to the summary. Yay. So the bottom line points: account CCAs serve diverse populations, some of which are quite disadvantaged. Because of the great income disparities, particularly in coastal and more affluent areas, disadvantaged communities may be lost in the aggregate data. Also note that disadvantaged households are often concentrated together rather than distributed throughout the population. So that's my illustrations with in EBCE territory with Ashland and Cherryland, and also in Clean Power Alliance territory with Willowbrook and Lennox and some of the other communities. Also note that low-income populations are identified by households, like CARE, and also communities by Cal EnviroScreen. And understanding the different units of measure is very important if you're going to be designing and implementing programs. Is it to address or engage low-income households or entire communities, say for community solar program? Also note, finally, that tools most often prescribed to identify disadvantaged communities and low-income households may miss significant numbers of households due to the use of the federal poverty level, and also because census tracts don't align with jurisdictions or boundaries. So point to one of the previous slides, Willowbrook in Cal EnviroScreen is actually, that population is attributed to nearby Linwood. So Linwood is not served by the Clean Power Alliance, but Willowbrook is. So what are the implications if program money for disadvantaged communities goes on behalf of Willowbrook, not served by Clean Power Alliance, to Linwood, which is served by, I believe, still Southern California Edison? So these are things that CCAs need to know about their service territories, need to understand about how disadvantaged communities are identified and how they're attributed, because again, back to the narrative of how we're perceived as not serving disadvantaged communities and having cherry-picked more affluent communities, if in fact the very communities that we are serving that are disadvantaged aren't even attributed to our service areas, that just feeds into the misperception. So that's it for me. I will stay on the line for the other presentations so that thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Deidre. Thank you and you guys in the workshop for your patience as we got through that successfully. So, okay, all right. So our next speaker is Alex Turek, and he's going to be providing some case studies of everything that has been talked about in this workshop on how Grid Alternatives is making equitable energy programs. So please help me welcome Alex.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you to everyone here, and especially to the speakers who have been giving kind of a 60,000 foot view of the programs that are available and the design of these programs that are intended to have equitable outcomes. What I'm going to be doing is discuss the actual on-the-ground implementation of these programs and the co-benefits that result from them. So real quick, I am a program manager with Grid Alternatives. We are a solar nonprofit that grew out of this idea, which you've heard throughout the day, that clean energy access has a equity problem, an access problem. Even though populations, underserved census tracts or communities of colors may spend a lot more on their utility bills as a percentage, of their income, a heavier energy burden. Even though they are disproportionately affected by pollution and future climate change repercussions like extreme heat days, they still are kind of the last ones in line to benefit from these new technologies. Grid grew out of recognizing that and making an intentional purpose to ensure that these clean energy technologies would be available to low-income and underserved communities. Obviously, this addresses environmental justice issues. It puts people to work. We're just as much of a job training organization as we are a solar nonprofit. And it accelerates the clean energy transition as well. We do our work. We're a full EPC installer. Like I mentioned, we are a job training organization, and we assist with policy and program development at the state and local level. Some of our programs, we are the state administrator for the SASH program, which if you income qualify and you live in the aforementioned disadvantaged communities, you qualify for effectively no cost solar. We do this through state rebates from the SASH program and third-party ownership. Multifamily installation, Amy mentioned the SOMA program, which is set to launch in the middle of this year, hopefully. It is the follow-up to its sister program, the MASH program, which was about a $200 million program that was passed in 2008 that resulted in a high number of megawatts developed on affordable housing complexes, these deed-restricted apartment complexes. This one is about 4 times the size, $1 billion over 10 years. So very excited. This is an intentional policy to expand solar access to those renters who actually face the greatest barriers to solar access. They don't own their property, they don't own the rooftop, they share the rooftop, they have uncertain tenancy durations. So a really intentional policy to expand solar access to renters. We are also developing community solar projects, mostly in Colorado, where the policy landscape is a bit more favorable for community solar. California is slowly getting there. It's the one place that California is a little further behind. Some of these programs were mentioned again by Amy. Some specific programs in the IOUs that commit at least 20% savings to disadvantaged communities and care customers that we're keeping a close eye on. We're hoping to get even more savings into the pockets of low-income homeowners. And for those who aren't aware of what community solar is, in a very traditional sense, it's a large single solar array that multiple utility customers can benefit from. So customer A can benefit from 5%, customer B from 10%, and so on. You gain economies of scale with that, so it's a lower cost per watt, and it expands access to those who can't install it on their rooftops due to structural issues or for renters due to the many barriers that they face. We also have a tribal program. We partner with tribes from around the country to help them achieve energy independence. And finally, we have an international program in Nicaragua, Nepal, and Mexico. Here's our overall impact. But like I mentioned, we're going to be discussing the actual implementation of these programs, specifically in the context of multifamily renters. And I'm going to walk us through 2 different examples of grid alternative projects that were successful in expanding access to multifamily affordable housing renters. This first case study is expanding access to renters through rebates, as well as virtual net metering. Who here is familiar with virtual net metering? That's a good room. That's a rare number right there. For those of you who are not, similar to the community solar concept, it's really a billing mechanism that reads the production of a single solar system and then allocates the benefits across multiple customers. So in a multifamily setting, it's really the only feasible way for multifamily renters or owners to access solar on their shared rooftop. It allows for multifamily solar. The SOMA program that we mentioned really is predicated on virtual net metering. At least half of the benefits need to go to the renters, and the only way those benefits can go to the renters is through virtual net metering. It also unlocks huge community solar potential. This is why community solar has really been so successful in places like Minnesota and Colorado because of their VNEM tariff. So that's the actual physical mechanism for delivering those benefits. The rebate structure is another strategy that the state thought through. How can we ensure that these benefits aren't just allocated to the common areas of these apartment buildings, but are also expanded to the renters? And they do this, I'm going to skip ahead here, by this rebate incentive structure. As you can see, the tenant portion of the system receives $3.20 per watt, which is really significant. As a solar installer, I can tell you that. The common area receives $1.10 per watt. So the idea is for the common area incentive to kind of cross-subsidize the tenant portion of the system, and the blended rebate would equal in and around the total cost of the system. So in a lot of instances of the properties that we're evaluating, a lot of the systems are completely offset by this rebate. Amy kind of went over the requirements, so I'm sure you know these already. I want to mention that the CCAs do qualify if they do offer virtual net meter. So putting those two things together, virtual net metering and these rebates that are structured in a way that incentivize the expansion of solar to the residents. Here's the case study. This was with Link Housing in Santa Ana, a property called City Gardens, right off the 5 freeway. 274 total tenants. We installed a 381 kilowatt system. This used match rebates, but I kind of wanted to put it in a SOMA context to give you an idea of how these rebates work. 70% of this system went to the residents. The average savings was about 80% off their utility bill. So very significant savings to the 274 residents who live in this complex. You could see that 70% of 381 is about 267 kilowatts at $3.20 a watt. That's about $850,000. The common area rebate is a little less, or a lot less, 125,000 to equal 978,000, or about the total cost of the system. So that kind of shows when you incorporate a large percentage of the system for tenants, you have a much higher probability of offsetting the entire cost through these SOMA rebates. So just to emphasize, this is a really exciting program from the state that, like Amy mentioned, anticipates about 300 megawatts to not only affordable housing. We obviously can all agree that we need more housing. It will save affordable housing developers operating costs that can be reinvested back into their mission of expanding housing. But it also expands access to those who face the greatest barriers to solar. So I'm very excited about this program. The second one takes place in LADWP territory, which is a unique kind of case study. Does not offer virtual net metering, cannot participate in the SOMA program, but does offer what is known as the feed-in tariff. The feed-in tariff is a pretty simple, it's one of its strengths, policy. The reason Germany was so successful in its solar development, really it allows the owner of the solar system to sell power directly to the utility. So in this instance, the tariff was 14.5 cents. Each kilowatt hour that we sold the utility, the owner would get 14.5 cents per those kilowatts. So we'll get into the numbers here. This is a really exciting project. It took place in the University Park neighborhood of South LA. Our partner was Esperanza Community Housing. Literally directly across the street from what is known as the Allen Co oil well. Here's the oil well facility. Here's the location of the installation. For years, Esperanza and the community was really fighting back against the development of this land for oil extraction. It was purchased in 2009. The new owner increased production by 400%. There was already health issues there that just, completely exacerbated the health issues. Major asthma, major nosebleeds. It was really a testament to the community who, banded together, did all kinds of community outreach, did all kinds of community events, and was able to get a moratorium on production of the oil well. This was kind of manifest into the People Not Pozos group and Stand LA, if some of you are familiar with them, which fought to shut this down and is currently fighting for at least a 2,500 foot setback from oil extraction here also, if you're paying attention to that. As you can see, this is around children. There's a school right around the corner. The health repercussions of urban oil extraction are severe, and we feel that solar is a obvious alternative to that, especially in the urban context. So what we wanted to do with this, it was a grant-funded project. We really wanted to contrast clean energy alternatives to this traditional fossil fuel extraction economy that was taking place right across the street from this system. Like I mentioned, it would be entered into the feed-in tariff program, which would create revenue for the property owner, who could then reinvest back into the property itself. Without virtual net metering, there was no direct way to deliver those benefits to the residents. So this was kind of a creative workaround to that. Obviously, the other goals of the program was to generate awareness of the oil well, like I mentioned, creative solution to the unavailability of VNEM, and provide job training. So overall, this program earns about $10,000 per year for the property. It turned their rooftop really into a revenue generator, which, as I mentioned, indirectly will benefit the residents. They've already placed about 6 computers. They've dedicated a computer room with free internet access. They're talking about expanding tutor services and job training services and things like that. So this really showcases how you can utilize a policy like the feed-in tariff to generate equitable outcomes. So between those two projects, the case studies, I think the lessons learned are virtual net metering is critical for expanding solar access to renters and to those who cannot host a solar system on top of their homes. In lieu of that policy, feed-in tariff or specialized rates can be used if designed correctly. And finally, the recommendation is to design rebates to produce equitable outcomes like that SOMA program, incentivizing the portion of the system that goes to benefit the tenants more than the common area will create these equitable outcomes. And that, we'll leave it there. There's my contact information. Happy to answer any questions. I think we're going into a Q&A now, but thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, we are doing a Q&A now, and we have Alex, Ami still here. I believe Heather is still here, and Deidre is on Zoom, so she can also answer any questions you have. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand.
What are the differences between Colorado and California that allow you to be more active there?
Sure. So really it is state policy. One of the biggest differences is a broad definition of virtual net metering, which means, so we have virtual net metering here in the IOU territory. It's just that it's restrained to the same parcel of land. So if you share the parcel of land with the solar system, you could benefit from it. In Colorado, it can be in the northeast part of the state. You could live in the southwest part of the state, and you could benefit from that system. So that allows a lot more flexibility in getting, if you want a large ground mount system in a rural area that feeds into an urban setting, you have that flexibility there. There's also a 10% low income carve out there, which we advocated for and which has resulted in a bit more equitable outcomes as well there.
This is another question for Alex. So the cost of solar installation is covered, but then who pays for the O&M? How is that provided?
Great question. So the O&M would be paid for by the property owner. I think in some instances you could fold it up and do a prepaid O&M package if there's room in that rebate in an upfront sense. But generally those operation and maintenance costs fall on the property owner.
The $978,000 for the Link Housing City Gardens project. What was the payback period for that, for the investment?
It's a good question. Well, as that illustrated, there was really no cost to it.
I mean, the
So
payback period
it was
year
immediate.
one, and every year after that it
Was common
year-
area
that's
operation
what I
cost.
thought I understood from your
Yeah.
presentation. Thank you.
In lieu of the rebates, I can't do it in top of my head, but it's, yeah, that just goes to show that the investment decision is a very easy one for the property owner, and it makes them account for their residents in that investment decision.
I want to make sure I understand the net metering. So is the assumption that the electricity is on a master meter, and so you need the net metering to figure out what the tenants?
No, it's just, without virtual net metering, you could theoretically install a solar system for each individual meter, each individual unit. But that is so wasteful and so costly. Where this is a single solar system fed into what's called a net generation meter. It reads the overall system's generation, and the billing software allocates 6% to here, 6% to here, 10% to this common area, 6% to unit A, and so on.
Okay. So if you had a building with a master meter for electricity, it
Doesn't really matter.
it doesn't matter.
Matter.
Right?
You could
Okay.
sub-meter after that, but that's, Ami mentioned this before. This is really, like, in affordable housing contexts, we're kind of getting into weeds here, but there's, utility allowances that might be under threat of being removed and the rent being increased. There's details within the policy that restricts that from happening. But outside of the scope of the SOMA program, you could theoretically go to a master meter system and then receive some kind of revenue payback from that. Anyone else?
All right, I think that's it. Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer Ward, the Director of External Affairs for Clean Power Alliance. I just wanted to wrap us up and please have everyone join me in another round of applause for all of our speakers. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to our directors, our chair, Diana Mahmood, Steve Zuckerman, Alex Montero, our alternate director, Jennifer Stark is here, and a handful of our CAC members. Who else did I miss? Oh yes, and Shote, they're in the back, haven't snuck out yet. Thank you all again so much for coming. This is only the second time we've produced one of these Sustainable Energy Incubator events, and they're going to be a continuing series as Clean Power Alliance grows. So please share your feedback with us. Continue to stay involved. We are going to be holding our next incubator event in the fall of this year. So thank you all again, and have a great day.